In the prelude to the Ashamnu, the short alphabetical vidui, confessional, we recite, "Our God and God of our ancestors, hear our prayer. Do not ignore our plea. We are neither so insolent or so obstinate as to claim in your presence that we are righteous, without sin. For we, like our ancestors who came before us, have sinned." Our rabbis teach us that the first step in the process of Teshuvah is admitting to ourselves and God that we have sinned. It does no good to read the list of sins that follow if we do not believe we have committed any of them. When I was editing our Machzor Lev Shalem, the rabbis of the Machzor committee wrestled with whether to return the traditional words of this paragraph. They agreed with the first part, that every human being is imperfect. The area of debate, however, focused on the traditional inclusion of "like our ancestors." This had been removed from the conservative movement's liturgy from both the Silverman Machzor and the Harlow Machzor. Admittedly, I too was concerned about adding this back into the liturgy. After all, the Vidui confessional is really about us, the living. So why should we add our ancestors into it? It is very hard to look back with a critical eye toward our ancestors who we love and miss so deeply. Hopefully, more times than not, we selectively recall the amazing things they did, the gifts they gave us, and the warm and gentle memories that have become part of who we are. We remember stories of courage in the face of adversity, Jewish holiday traditions passed down, and family bonds that brought us and community together. We are the heirs of their legacy, including the world which they built and defended. We are forever indebted to them, as our lives stand upon the work and sacrifice that they made. There is little doubt that we generally do idealize our ancestors. Time passes, we miss them, and as our tradition teaches us to say, Zichronam livracha, may their memories be for a blessing. And so it is to the blessings of their lives that we hold fast. Yet I am thankful that the traditional liturgy was returned. As the Machzor committee wrote, even previous generations whom we may idealize contain sinners. No one has walked the earth and not sinned. And what is relevant and true for us is that we are the heirs of their sins as well as our own. The choices they made have become part of the inheritance we have received. It does not mean that we do not love them. It means, as I have taught many times before, that we love them for all that they were. That includes the good, the bad, their blessings, and their imperfections. We love them nonetheless. Just as God continues to love us despite our own flaws. Our Torah teaches us as much in the stories we just read about Abraham and Sarah, the founders of our faith and the spiritual ancestors of us all. Avraham Avinu, Abraham our father, and Sarah Imenu, Sarah our mother. We see the heights of their faith and moral courage, the qualities that we still aspire to reach. But the Torah does not shy away from their mistakes or failures either. The mistreatment of Hagar and Ishmael, and the binding of Isaac without so much as an argument. It is possible to hold both admiration and love for our biblical heroes, as well as learn from their mistakes. In fact, even Moses, our greatest prophet and teacher, sins before God and is punished with not being able to enter into the promised land. Our ancestors, like us, were complex people who have left us a legacy that we both appreciate and need to wrestle with. One of the things that I love most about our tradition is that it is honest. It shows the full picture. In the pages of all of our sacred texts, we get to see the fullness of the human condition. There are no saints who are blameless, who aren't human. because we as human beings are imperfect. Our goal as human beings is not ever to be perfect, but instead to be engaged in the process of perfecting. This process is what Teshuvah, repentance, is all about. We believe God is gracious and compassionate, patient, merciful, and forgiving, waiting for us to return to better ourselves and our society. Judaism is built upon the premise of both conserving and honoring tradition, seeking to adapt, change, and reinterpret it so that it remains relevant and meaningful. The sages understood that for Judaism to survive, it had to contain a mechanism for hearing God's will in every age, place, and circumstance, and yet be connected back to our spiritual roots. Moses may not have had a microwave oven, but Jewish practice today has instructions on how to kosher one. Our Torah is alive with every new commentary written, Devar Torah given, and new halachot, Jewish practices, debated and adopted. Like our ancient sages, we are constantly renewing our Jewish faith, applying the ethical and moral values of our Torah to our contemporary lives and world, so that God's voice is forever heard and God's teachings a constant path to blessing and life. Likewise, the framers of our American democracy and Constitution had the wisdom and humility to include ways of amending it so that it would always be a living, breathing document able to be relevant to future ages that they could not even imagine. 100 years of women finally getting the vote. L'chaim, no l'chaim, l'chaim. And that African Americans are not considered property. It was understood to be an imperfect document, filled with compromises, written by complex and imperfect people. We can still admire Washington, Jefferson, Hamilton, and others while being honest about their iniquities. Each successive generation has had to wrestle with the legacy of those before them, with steps forward and steps backward. As Billy Joel sang, "We didn't start the fire, it was always burning since the world's been turning. We didn't start the fire, no we didn't light it, but we're trying to fight it." This year, many of the failures of our country and society have come to the fore. We cannot push them under the rug and ignore them. If we consider ourselves Americans, the home of the free and the brave, then we all own the whole of our complex history, the good and the bad, our triumphs as well as our failings. We need not have initiated the original wrongs to have allowed them to go unacknowledged, unresolved, and unrepented. We are in the midst of a great societal reckoning. This is a pivotal Teshuvah moment for us as a nation. We can and we must finally confront the stain of systemic racism and injustice, which contradicts our highest ideals and values. This will not be easy, because it is not those who are blatant racists that we seek to change, but a system that for hundreds of years was built on inequality, discrimination, and economic disadvantage. It has kept far too many African Americans from living, working, and learning, as well as being treated as equal American citizens. Stolen and sold as slave auctions from Africa, treated as less than human, as owned property, our country fought a bloody civil war, where afterward Reconstruction fell far short of restitution for generations of slavery, brutality, and oppression. The wrongs were not righted. This was then followed by Jim Crow, redlining, judicial law enforcement injustice, voter suppression, gerrymandering, and being intentionally left behind. The long list of racism touches every part of the experience of African Americans to this day. As a nation, we all must be part of the Teshuvah process in order to forge a better way forward, make restitution, and seek forgiveness and healing. Additionally, for far too long, we have allowed hate and divisiveness to tear us apart, creating an us versus them mentality. This has led to intolerable violence, a rise in anti-Semitism, civil and class economic strife, xenophobia, and attacks on who is a real American and who is not. I believe we can work to address the cruelty, violence, and hate in our country, the economic disparity that drives people to seek the dignity they lack by any means. We must address despair and confront the hate and violence. It will take trust, a healing spirit, and the redress of both past and present grievances. America should not be the land of violence where people are afraid of their neighbors or wonder whether they can safely pray to God in our houses of worship. Instead, we should be working to feed, clothe, educate, employ, innovate, and keep each other healthy and safe. Therefore, with so much at stake this Yom Kippur, we must seek the courage of the path of Teshuvah, reckoning, repairing, reconciling, and forgiving. The steps of Teshuvah require that we, number one, admit that we have sinned, as well as our ancestors. Number two, we have to name these sins aloud and show remorse for them. Then attempt to rectify, repair, and make restitution to those we hurt. It is only then that we can ask them for forgiveness, to go before God and ask for God's forgiveness. We must resolve to not repeat the same sins again. And finally, we must resist and choose a different path forward, even when tested by the same temptations. The Teshuvah process begins by facing our history, our past, and the sins that are both our own doing and those of our ancestors. Sometimes we must undo the errors of our ancestors and move to remake ourselves and our community for the better. And we have always historically done this, both as Jews and as Americans. Only by confronting our history can we transform the present, bring forgiveness and redemption to ourselves and our future. As Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav taught, if it is possible to destroy, then it is possible to repair. With God's blessing and help, let each of us get to this Teshuvah work. Amen. Gamar Chatimat Tovah, may you be sealed for a healthy, happy, and sweet New Year. Shana Tova.